Australian Colin Mackerras first came to China in 1964 and has since split his time between China and his home country. As a sinologist, he has specialized in Chinese culture, ethnic groups and China's evolving image in the world. He was mentioned as a bridge builder during President Xi Jinping's address to the Australian Parliament in 2014. What has kept him going despite the ups and downs in bilateral ties? What does he make of the 20th National Congress of the Chinese Communist Party and its key messages? I had the pleasure to speak to Professor Colin Mackerras, Sinologist and Professor Emeritus of Griffith University of Australia, joining me from Brisbane. Let's start with your unique experience with China. I mean, you came to China first in the autumn of 1964. That's over 10...
That's right, yeah, 1964.
That's over 10 years before I was born, okay? And, and you have visited China since then some 70 times.
About that, yes, at least, maybe more. I've lost count, to be honest.
Yeah, and your son was actually the first Australian to be born in New China, if the record is correctly.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's right.
So how did it all started? I mean, what brought you?
It was coincidental. I bumped into a friend of mine. I'm Australian, of course. I was born and brought up in Sydney, but I was working in Cambridge. I was studying Chinese history, actually, in Cambridge, and I met a friend who was going to China, and I asked him to tell the representation in London to give him my name. So they did, and they got in touch with me, and we went to China. It was very, very unusual in those days. Australians very rarely went to China.
I can imagine, and you stayed for 2 years as an English.
2 years, that's right.
As an English,
I was in the Beijing Foreign Languages Institute.
Yeah. Well, it must be a different world, right, compared to what we see.
It's a different world. But I got to love China and I love Chinese people while I was there on that first occasion. And I have not changed my mind ever since. Some of the people I met there are still my good friends. As you say, it's a very, very different world now. It was the world of Mao Zedong, and it was very backward in economic terms. And the students were very revolutionary. I mean, they're still very patriotic, of course, but the way they think is much more open to the outside world, and it's much more, it's much more, they're much more sophisticated now. And of course, the economy has changed enormously, enormously.
What is the biggest change if you were to put your finger on one? I mean, it's difficult, 50 years, but... I
would say that China has risen, and it's now an economic powerhouse. And I just was noting before this interview, the World Bank says that in 2010, China's GDP constituted only 7.74% of the total of the world, but now that's gone up to 15.19 in just over 10 years. That's gone up, more than doubled, and so it's now a significant part of the world economy. And I think that's a really great achievement. And I think you can see that in all kinds of ways. You can see it in the infrastructure, the high-speed railway trains especially, but also other factors. And you can see it in the confidence of the people, and you can see it in the living standards of the people. Right. It's a very different world, and a much better world.
Yeah, you have been an excellent witness to the changes that happened to China. Of course, a lot of things changed, but what do you say is the most consistent force, the factor that possibly contributed to such change, if you can...
The most significant factor, I think, is the good leadership and the hard work of the Chinese people. I mean, of course, there are other factors. The Americans like to say that they should get the credit, but I don't think so. I mean, of course, the opening to America in 1971, 72, that, of course, helped. But it's not the main factor. The main factor is good leadership and also the hard work of the Chinese people. That's what I think, anyway.
Well, now the leadership of the Communist Party of China is again in the spotlight very continuously. Right. Yeah, with especially with the convening the ongoing National Congress, the 20th National Congress. I'm sure you have been paying attention to it.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, President Xi gave a report, a very high-profile one. So, what is the biggest takeaway of you from this report this time?
Well, I think the biggest takeaway is that the Chinese the economy will still remain very important, but he wants to put equality and the people more centre rather than business. I mean, of course, business matters, but I think equality, because I mean, China's economy, as it grew, it's grown more unequal. And I think he thinks that it should be, you know, made common prosperity. Everyone should take part in this. And I think he's right. I also think that, I mean, on the side of that, the Chinese population has now got much more urban than it was. It's now more than half urban. And it was only 10% urban when the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, came to power. And I think the urban population is likely to be more developed than the rural population. That's been a thing in Chinese history all the way through. And I think it's very important to note that. And he noted it too in the in his report. And I mean, I think it was an excellent report, and the economy is important. But I think I'd also like, since you asked me what sprang out at me, I'd also like to note the issue of national defence. I mean, just a few days ago, just almost the same time as the 20th Congress opened, Biden took a decision in Washington to cut off the semiconductors from China as far as he can, and his aim is to stop the rise of China's technology. Now, the rise of China's technology has been very, very important. So he wants to, Biden wants to cut that off. He wants to stop China's rise. Right. And the reason is obvious. He's jealous of China, and he wants America to stay number one. And he thinks that China is going to, you know, overtake the United States, and it probably will too. But I mean, that's what he's determined to stop that.
In the international press, there is this comment that, yeah, listen to the Chinese leader. He used a lot of harsh words, you know, words such as fighting, such as struggle, such as self-reliance, believing in ourselves. I think there is a reason why China has to stand up and refuse to be pushed around or to be bullied.
Well, I think there is too. I think it's been pushed around far too much. And the United States has signalled that they're not prepared to treat China as an equal. And I mean, China should be treated as an equal. Of course it should. And I think the United States has been working to try and undermine China, and it's continuing to try and undermine China. And I think that China should struggle against that. Of course it should. And I don't see that as being particularly aggressive. It's the US that's being aggressive, in my opinion.
Yeah, exactly. Some people are trying to paint China's latest spirit or future image as one of belligerence, one of aggression, further aggressiveness. You don't see it that way, though.
No, I certainly don't. I think that the West should stop trying to fear China. China is not belligerent. I mean, look, since 1979, China has not sent troops into another country, ever. You compare that with the United States. It's waged war against numerous countries. It's overturned countries' governments. It's the US that's belligerent. China hasn't been belligerent. It has never tried to change the ideology of another country.
How do you understand the apparent contradiction between the high support and high trust the Chinese general public has towards their system, towards their leaders, versus the kind of dichotomy that has been imposed on China between separating the party and the people? You criticize the Chinese society being an autocratic one, and yet if you look at the people, that they have very high support, they have very high trust in the system. How do you understand that?
Well, I mean, the way it looks to me, and I'm only going on what my experience in China. I mean, I've lived in China, as you said before, many times. But in the last 10 years, I must admit, unfortunately, I haven't been back since 2019, but I hope to go back sometime soon. But when I was there, what I noticed was that the people, they are doing pretty well. I mean, of course there are problems, but they have faith in the system. And the more the Americans try to stir up dissent, which they do, they've been doing that for a long time. Mm-hmm. I think the Americans, I mean, I know friends, they say, you know, the Americans are trying to split the people from the government, but we're not having anything from that. And I think that the people, there's been figures, you know, there've been surveys done, and what they've found is that the Chinese people they trust the people, the leaders, much more than people in almost any other country. Certainly in the Western countries, there's not that much faith in leaders nowadays.
Thank you so much, Professor Colin Mackerras, Sinologist and Emeritus Professor at Griffith University in Australia. It's been a great pleasure. Thank you. It's been our pleasure too. That was Colin Mackerras, Sinologist and Emeritus Professor at Griffith University, Australia. With that, we come to the end of this edition of The Point with me, Liu Xin. As always, you can follow me on Facebook and Twitter using the handle Liu Xin in Beijing. On behalf of the whole team, thanks for watching. You've got The Point.